So this is big. This is big Epstein news that Donald Trump definitely does not want us talking about. But I'm going to talk about it, and there's some things about this that I want to explain. Now, we've learned that the Epstein estate settled with a victim, but the estate did not settle with the victim just on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein and whatever he did to this victim, but also on behalf of Donald Trump. Watch this.
But we do know that Khan, Epstein's accountant, testified that the Epstein estate settled with Jane Doe number 4, a very important Jane Doe. Jane Doe number 4's files were hidden until Trump bombed Iran and changed the subject. Jane Doe's number 4 files were only found missing because of the Maxwell discovery. And people noticed that Bates stamps, numbers that lawyers use to identify documents, were missing. So we get, finally, right after bombing Iran, we get the Jane Doe number 4 files. Now, lying to the FBI is a crime. Martha Stewart went to jail for it. All people interviewed by the FBI are told that. Jane Doe number 4 alleged to the FBI that Epstein abused her when she was 13 and that Trump abused her when she was 15. Khan, Epstein's accountant, testified that the Epstein estate settled with Jane Doe number 4 for both Epstein and Trump. His lawyer tried to walk that back. Indike refused to confirm or deny that. Now, how do we get to the bottom of that? Congress passes a law invalidating all NDAs from the Trump or the Trump Organization, from Epstein, any of his entities, from the estate, or based on any activities at the Epstein properties. Let's have the truth. We want the truth? No NDAs.
So Jane Doe number 4 told the FBI that when she was a teenager, that Donald Trump sexually assaulted her. Now, we've already known this. I've talked about this several times. The FBI interviewed this victim on multiple occasions, and they found her to be credible. The FBI does not interview a victim over and over again if they do not find that victim to be credible. And according to the files, the FBI wanted to pursue this, but that the victim didn't want to. She didn't want to go any further for fear of retribution. Now, what's also important to note, as was mentioned in this clip, is that when you make a statement to the FBI, if you lie, that is a felony. You can go to prison for lying to the FBI. Many people have gone to prison for lying to the FBI. It happens all the time. When they are going after people, if there's an investigation, oftentimes they go after people for lying to the FBI. When they can't get any other criminal charges to stick, but they know that people have lied to them in the course of their investigation, they go after them for lying. So this is actually a fairly common crime. It happens all the time that people are prosecuted for lying to the FBI, and they are warned at the outset. Before giving a statement, they are warned, if you lie to us, you can go to prison. And yet, this woman testified many times, or told the FBI many times, about what happened to her, what was done to her by Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. And she's never been charged with lying to the FBI. Now, this tells you everything you need to know about how Donald Trump has conducted himself over the last year. And it tells you why he is so desperate for his party to maintain control of Congress in the midterms, and why he will stop at nothing to rig the outcome of the election if he possibly can, because this is exactly the kind of thing that can be exposed. And God only knows what else is in those files that they're covering up. Because remember, this is what's been released. There are millions of pages of documents that have not been released. And if we have already learned this stuff, imagine what is still being covered up. And that's why Donald Trump will do whatever it takes, including starting an illegal war with Iran. I am convinced that the timing of this war had everything to do with the Epstein-Trump cover-up. Now, Trump may have done this at some point in time anyway, but I think the timing was a panic move. And there's other things to indicate that they did not plan to go in when they did. For example, the fact that they were completely unprepared to deal with Iran's closing of the Strait of Hormuz, which of course was anticipated. They certainly would have been advised that Iran would do this. Trump didn't care. He had to cover this up because what was happening right before Trump went into Iran, Trump knew this was coming out. And so he started bombing Iran to distract from this. Also, at the time, there was a bunch of other stuff coming out that was starting to get traction that was very, very bad for Donald Trump. So all of this is coming to a head on the Friday before we started bombing Iran. And when did that happen? Early Saturday morning. Trump couldn't take it anymore. The story was starting to get traction. So bomb Iran. So they weren't prepared for the Strait of Hormuz. They weren't prepared to evacuate Americans out of the Middle East. Remember that? The State Department told Americans to get the hell out of the Middle East after the war started, but said, sorry, we can't get you out. There's nothing we can do. Those are the kinds of things that would have been done in advance, or they at least would have had a plan to evacuate these people. They had no plan because they weren't planning to go in when they did. This was a panic move. Anyway, and by the way, one more thing about the midterms. Covering his ass for what he did to children with his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein, and all of the other things that he has done, all the other crimes that he has committed before he took office and since taking office. That's what he's trying to cover up. He doesn't give a shit about losing control of Congress because he cares about passing legislation. He doesn't pass legislation for the most part. He does everything on his own. He does everything by executive order. His party controls both houses of Congress as it is, and he goes around them all the time. He spends money without congressional approval. He raises money, taxes, and illegal tariffs, and all these things without congressional approval. He goes to war without congressional approval. He doesn't need Congress. He doesn't care about Congress. So if Democrats win control of Congress, from a legislative standpoint, does that really matter? No, he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't legislate, and he doesn't care much about policy or anyway. I mean, he doesn't care about any of that stuff. He cares about himself. So the only reason he cares about maintaining control of Congress is to continue to cover his ass. That's the only reason. Now, I want to deal with something that she said in this video, because I hear this all the time. In the age of Trump, we have heard a lot about NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, because Donald Trump, for decades, has been forcing people he works with and does business with and all of this to sign non-disclosure agreements to keep their mouths shut because he's such a fucking slimeball. He's such a criminal. He's got to cover his ass. And this is one of the things he learned from Roy Cohn, to get these non-disclosure agreements from everyone. And so this is really important because in all of the discussions over all these years about non-disclosure agreements, there's never any discussion about what the hell is a non-disclosure agreement and what effect do they have? Are they even lawful? How do you enforce a non-disclosure agreement? And what happens if you violate a non-disclosure agreement? And these things are particularly pertinent here when it comes to Donald Trump's cover-up of what he did with his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the recommendation that this attorney offers in this video is for Congress to pass a law invalidating all non-disclosure agreements relative to all of this Epstein stuff. So anything having to do with Epstein and Trump and all these Epstein victims and everything having to do with this, that you would just pass a law saying those non-disclosure agreements are null and void. And so that would allow people who are subject to these NDAs to come forward and speak. But beyond that, really as a legal matter, for most of these NDAs, you don't even need to, because here's what you need to know. Here's the truth about non-disclosure agreements. They're just contracts. That's what a non-disclosure agreement is. It's a contract whereby you are bound legally to keep your mouth shut about whatever it is. However, you can easily get around a lot of these NDAs. As I said, an NDA is just a contract. So it needs the requisites that make all contracts binding. For example, there must be consideration given by both parties to a contract. So if there is a victim or anyone else who Donald Trump wants to keep quiet and who is forced to sign an NDA, if they did not receive something of value in exchange for signing that NDA, then that NDA has no legal weight whatsoever. It's null and void. It's a meaningless piece of paper. Now, how would you, let's step back for a second. How would you enforce an NDA, right? Say someone was required to keep their mouth shut about Donald Trump and they spill the beans. They're like, fuck this. I don't care about the NDA. I'm going to tell you what I know about this slime ball. What could happen? Is it a crime? Could they be prosecuted for this? No, it's not a crime. So the only thing that could happen is that Donald Trump could sue them. That's it. So what would he sue them for? If he gave them money to keep their mouths shut, he can sue them to recoup that money. That's pretty much it. And if he didn't give them any money or anything else of value in exchange for signing that NDA, then when he goes to sue that person, the judge is going to throw it out of court. The first motion that's going to be made is that there was nothing enforceable. This is not an enforceable contract. There was no consideration given. My client didn't get shit for signing this NDA. So that's a basic of contract law. If there's no consideration, then there is no contract. You don't have a valid legal contract just because you sign your name to something. There's other prerequisites that are required legally to make that a binding contract. So consideration is one thing. And then even if, again, it's not a crime. So even if there was consideration given and it is a binding legal contract, so then what's the worst that can happen? You got to give the money back that you were given to keep your mouth shut. Now, as to that, let me tell you something. If any of these victims came forward and told what they know about Trump and Trump sued them and won and they had to cough over some money, I guarantee you we can crowdsource way more money than those victims will have had to pay over to Donald Trump. Okay, we can compensate those victims just through a GoFundMe or some other form of crowdsourcing. In fact, they will make so much more money above what they had to shell out to Donald Trump from the crowdsourcing. But that's not going to happen anyway. Donald Trump's not going to sue anybody. Have you noticed he never sues anybody over Epstein? He sues people over anything. He sues people over polls that he doesn't like. Yet look at what everybody has said about him. People have literally accused him of raping children. He hasn't sued anyone. Why do you think that is? Because he doesn't want to have to go through discovery. He doesn't want to have to testify under oath about what he and his best friend Jeffrey Epstein did to children, because that's what would happen. Okay, there's no Fifth Amendment right to remain silent in a civil lawsuit. You sue somebody, you're going to be put under oath. And everything else, subpoenas and all of this stuff, that's going to be part of discovery. Witnesses of all kinds are going to have to testify. No way. There's no way Trump is going to put himself through that, which is exactly why he has never sued anyone over the Epstein stuff. And in addition to the fact that truth is an absolute defense to defamation. So if somebody made an allegation against Trump, say accused him of having done something criminal to a child, guess what? Establishing that he did that is an absolute defense to a defamation lawsuit. But he's not going to sue anyone anyway. Now, but that's the only way you go about invalidating, or that's the only way you go about enforcing an NDA. If somebody talks that was subject to an NDA, that's the only way to enforce it. You'd have to bring a lawsuit. Nobody's going to jail. It's not a crime. Maybe if you lose, you have to cough up some money. Now, talked about ways to get around an NDA. So you have lack of consideration as a way to get around any contract, but specifically here an NDA. If an NDA is overly broad, a court can find that NDA is null and void. You know, if it says, you can never talk about me in any way, all right, that's going to be void on its face for being overly broad. Now, here are some things that are really pertinent to any NDAs relevant to Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. You cannot, it is null and void. It would be an illegal NDA that a court would give no weight to if that NDA, the purpose of the NDA was to hide a crime. So if Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump committed crimes against this person and the NDA that they made her sign was to cover up that crime, a judge is going to throw that out. They're going to say, all right, this NDA is null and void. Or more broadly speaking, if the NDA violates public policy in some way, for example, to silence a whistleblower, right? And this is especially pertinent in terms of all these people inside the government that Donald Trump has forced to sign NDAs, which he does with people in the government. Okay, those are void. They're void on their face. If someone has found out about something illegal that is happening in the Trump administration and they want to come forward as a whistleblower, an NDA is not going to stop them. What's Trump going to do? He's going to instruct the Department of Justice to sue that person for coming forward as a whistleblower? Okay, fine. A judge is going to toss that lawsuit like that. They're going to say that violates public policy. You can't use NDAs to silence whistleblowers. You can't use NDAs, as another example, to prevent someone from cooperating with law enforcement. If Trump and Epstein had NDAs with victims that said, you can't tell shit to the police, you're going to have to keep your mouth shut and not tell any law enforcement what we did to you. All right, that violates public policy. That's against public policy. A judge would throw that out in a second. That NDA, even if they were given consideration, even if they gave that person a ton of money to keep their mouth shut, the purpose of the NDA is for them not to cooperate with law enforcement and be thrown out of there. Or even if just in the application of the NDA, if the invocation of the NDA were to stop or to punish a person for cooperating with law enforcement, that would violate public policy and a judge would throw it out. Or for another example, if Congress wants a person to testify, that's public policy right there. And for someone to say, well, I signed an NDA, and you see this kind of thing all the time. Witnesses say, oh, well, I'd like to tell you, but I signed an NDA. Bullshit. That's not a valid reason not to testify. What's going to happen if you testify? They should make these fuckers testify, because what's going to happen? Okay, then Trump sues them for testifying before Congress. That's going to get thrown right out of court, just like that. And then, of course, if the person signs an NDA and they were coerced, or they signed under duress, or as a result of fraud, they were threatened, whatever it is, whether they got money, whether there was consideration involved or not. Look, if you put a gun to somebody's head and say, hey, if you don't want this to go very badly for you, take this $1 million and sign this NDA. That's not legal. Just because you gave them $1 million, that was under duress. That was under the threat that their brains would be splattered all over the desk if they didn't sign. That NDA is null and void and would be given no legal weight by a court. Anyway, now, I say this all in the context of victims of Epstein and Trump who may have signed non-disclosure agreements. Now, I'm not talking about them specifically. I don't know their specific situations. I don't know why they have not spoken out publicly. You know, there's lots of reasons other than just an NDA why some of these victims might want to keep their mouth shut and not come forward. Not the least of which is they would immediately become a target for Trump's violent mob. And so that's a pretty compelling reason that these people, in addition to all kinds of other reasons, not wanting to talk about that publicly, but certainly having a target put on you. Okay. Nobody knows what this violent Trump mob would do. They're violent. They're criminal. So I can understand, but just generally speaking, I'm so sick of hearing about NDAs. Oh, well, Trump keeps everybody quiet by NDAs. So fucking what? I guarantee you that most of these NDAs are void. They would be void if they were ever challenged. And again, the only way they get challenged is if Trump sues the person. That's it. The police aren't going to come knocking on anyone's door if someone violates an NDA. It's not a crime. It would be a civil lawsuit at worst. And that's only if Trump brought a lawsuit. And then for all of these reasons, most of which probably would apply in most of these situations, these NDAs would be null and void. People seem to think that there's some magic legal principle that if you sign your name to something, that's it. Now it's a legal binding contract because you put your name on a piece of paper. No, that's not how contract law works. There's got to be a whole other things that go along with that contract to make it legally binding. And I bet you in most, if not all of these NDAs that Donald Trump has, certainly the ones with respect to his victims, victims of various kinds over the years who he has sought to keep quiet. I guarantee you that most, if not all of those would be legally null and void. Just because someone signs it, that doesn't mean anything. Anyway, as much as Donald Trump wants all this Epstein stuff to go away, it ain't going away. I mean, his war in Iran, his illegal war in Iran, has been very successful thus far in its primary goal. You know, you hear a lot of conversation about, oh, what's the goal? What's the objective? Regime change, degrade Iran's military, destroy, obliterate their nuclear program. You hear all of these shifting objectives for this illegal war. They all missed the mark. That's not the reason Trump went to war with Iran. Epstein. What Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein did to children is why Donald Trump went to war with Iran. That's it. And given that was the objective, to distract from Epstein, what he did with Epstein, in that regard, at least, this war with Iran has been highly successful because not too many people right now are focused on Epstein. But it's still percolating out there. It's not going away. Maybe it's the thing that brings this criminal piece of shit down. One can only hope. All right, that's it. Talk to you again soon.